Good morning. This is the 8th day of June 2007. We are interviewing at the Veterans Memorial Building, or the old library in Lindstrom, Minnesota. We're interviewing Don Hogle. He was born on December 11th, 1924. He is a veteran of World War II. He served in the U.S. Army. He attained the rank of PFC, and he served in the European area. My name is Don Bungham, and I'm working with the American Legion Post 83 of Lindstrom, the American Legion Post 272 of Chisago City, Minnesota, the VFW Post of 7267 of Lindstrom, Minnesota, and the Chisago County Historical Society of Lindstrom. We're going to start our interview by having Don tell us about his family, where he was born, where he grew up, other members of his family, and how they became, or how he became involved with the military and his experiences thereof. So, Don, it's all yours.
Okay. Good morning. As already stated, I was born in December of 1924 in the small town of Ticonderoga, New York. My father was a barber. I had one older brother, a younger brother, and two younger sisters. I became interested in science very early in my lifetime and decided that I wanted a career in that area and worked hard to attain it, since my father was of moderate means and I felt the only way I could get to college was through scholarship. Well, when I graduated from high school, I got an opportunity to go to Cornell University, but instead events in Europe intervened, and on December 7th, 1941, on a Sunday morning, I remember very well, the news of Pearl Harbor came. And at that moment, I realized that my aspirations for a college education would have to be put aside for the duration. I therefore applied for a entry into a small technical school in northern New York so that I could get some college education before the inevitable draft caught up with me. They accelerated the program from 2 years to 14 months and started it in July after my June graduation from high school. So I had the specter of military service hanging over my head for the next 14 months. And of course, at the end of that 14 months, the draft board was waiting for me to appear in town so they could send me off to the military. I beat them to the punch and volunteered, which meant that I had a better opportunity to choose which branch I wanted to get into if they gave me that opportunity. I might say that was one of my first major mistakes in life, because during the examination, physical exam and screening process of going into the Army, they asked me what branch I wanted to go into. And I had been studying the various programs that they had at that time, A12 and V5 or whatever it was, which was the naval program, and they had an Air Force program and a Coast Guard program, a Marine program, all of which gave you some bits of education, presumably, before you went on active service. Well, I thought that the greatest opportunity to stay in college, if I got there, would be for the Army, so I chose the Army. And I suffered because of it, but I think it made me a better person since I survived. Anyway, I reported to Camp Upton, New York, and I think it was September 43. and immediately was sent to Fort Benning to take A-12 basic training, which was, I believe, 12 weeks, something of that sort. Upon which time they put me on a train and were going to send me to Cornell, of all places.
Would you say you took your basic at Fort Benning?
At Fort Benning, yes.
For 12 weeks?
12 weeks.
12 weeks.
I think it was 12 weeks. My memory is not that good anymore.
Now, do you remember any instances of that Fort Benning experience that might be?
Yes, very definitely. There was a fellow in our group. The whole training program was of people who had signed up for A-12.
And A-12 specifically was what?
Army college training. Presumably before they sent you to officer training school, if the war lasted that long. I was interested in chemistry, so I was looking to get into the chemical corps. But second unfortunate thing in my military service career, as the train started to pull out to go to Cornell, they stopped it, took us off the train and sent us back to Fort Benning, which I had 4 to 6 weeks of further basic training. We went to the station again to go to college. This time I didn't get on the train, and they sent me back to Fort Benning for pre-officer training, which was just a holding pattern, I'm sure. At which time, sometime during that period, they said, okay, you guys aren't going to go to college, you're going to the infantry. So I was sent with most of my other trainee friends to Mississippi, to Fort Livingston, I believe it was, for the 86th Division. And the 86th Division was composed of about 90%, very rough figure, of people like myself. There were very few regular enlistees or drafted non-college bound people. So we were looked upon as sort of a secondary unit, as a little bit less than up to standard for infantry operations. And as it turned out, we were trained specifically for the Pacific, since we did a lot of training in the swamps of Louisiana, from which they were well known for all the snakes that are in there. And I was particularly sensitive to snakes, so even the sight of a snake during my formative years sent me into an emotional quandary. And but anyway, I ended up in this division, and we did, I've forgotten, several months of training, during which time the Allies landed at Omaha Beach and into Europe. And when the time came for us to end our training, they lined us up and said, okay, half of you are going to the European theater, half of you are going to the Pacific theater. And as I said earlier this morning, the dividing line came 2 people after my name. So I went to Europe. And one incident I might mention, we had, just before we were scheduled to go, we had a final exam, if you might call it that, where squads were taken out into the field and then given tests of various sorts. And which reminds me of another big mistake I made in my military career. During our rifle training course, They start you out with pistol, and you go to rifle and machine gun, and among those is Browning automatic rifle, BAR, which is the firepower of a squad of 12 men within a platoon in the infantry. For some reason, I took to the BAR, and I fired expert in BAR. And so I was a BAR man in this exercise we had, which was a machine gun stopped the progress of the squad through the training course. And the object was for the squad was to take out the machine gun without getting eliminated yourself. So our squad leader assigned me to give them cover fire at the machine gun, the dummy. It was up on a hill, about 100 yards away from where we were stopped. And the colonel who was directing the exercise said, and we had live ammunition in this exercise, and he said the object is for you to keep those two dummies up there on the machine gun occupied, so they can't fire on the rest of the squad as they go up to surround them and capture them. And I said, okay, that's easily done. And I got down in position, and you know, a BAR has a bipod on the front of it, and you, depending on how much pressure you put on the trigger, you can either fire single shots, short bursts, or continuous, run the whole clip. Well, I said, well, there's only two dummies up there on that machine gun, and they said yes, and I said okay, and I fired 2 bursts of 2, and 2 dummies fell over, and the colonel said exercise over. And just prior to that, as we were being stopped, as a matter of fact, when we hit the ground, when the colonel said you're being fired on, I threw my BAR out in front of me as I went down behind a tree, and lo and behold, up came a snake. So I whipped out my knife and chopped the snake up into little bits. And
you did?
Well, yeah, I mean, it was all, in my mind, it was a must. You know, I was impelled to do this. Well, at the end of the exercise, they had a critique, and we sat in a natural bowl on a hillside with the officers down at the bottom of the hill with a PA system, bullhorn in those days, giving a critique. And this officer commented on how easily my squad had taken out this machine gun. And just at that moment, I was sitting cross-legged on the ground. Up out of the ground came a ground snake. And of course, you know what happened. I jumped up and I chopped him up to bits. And a colonel stood there and said nothing until this was all over. And of course, everybody, the whole division was looking at me. And all he said was, and there he is. And for the rest of the time I spent with that group of buddies, at every opportunity when we were in the field, if they found a snake, they put it in my sleeping bag. So
they weren't as frightened as you were.
No. Well, they thought it was a
sure.
joke. But to me, it was no joke.
Are there any of those people that you associated with that are kind of a special memory of those basic people?
Well, there was one, and it wasn't a good association. He was the goof up of our barracks, and I won't say. I remember his name, but I won't say it. Mm-hmm. He was from New York City, and he had an influential family, and he was trying his best to get out of the infantry and get into the Coast Guard Academy. And I also had made an application to the Coast Guard Academy, But his way of getting out of the Army was to fall out for a march with his boots on the wrong feet and his pack upside down and stupid things like that. And I recall that when time came for the announcement of whether any of the people who had applied to the Coast Guard Academy would made it, his mother and a congressman showed up in camp, and the announcement was made that Lionel was the candidate. And that was my first introduction to how the real world operates. So he went off to the Coast Guard Academy, and I went off to Europe. And those of us going to Europe were sent to Fort Dix to get on the ship, which was the Queen Mary, as a matter of fact.
Oh, really?
And as I was getting on board, going up the gangplank, one of the people on the dock grabbed my hand and said, "I'm your uncle. I'm working here." And sure enough, it was one of my aunt's husbands.
Is that right?
So he saw me off to Europe. And we landed in Glasgow Harbor, and the Queen Mary, of course, couldn't get into the inner harbor, so we had to go from the outer harbor on a harbor ship into the dock. And in order to get from Queen Mary into this harbor ship, they opened the lowest cargo door in the Queen Mary and lined us up, and we had to jump down onto the deck of the harbor ship, and it was a rather rough day. And fortunately, I was in the second rank that was supposed to jump. And they said, well, what you've got to do is to time the rise of the harbor ship with your jump, so that you hit the harbor ship at the height of its rise. And the first fellow who jumped didn't do that, and he went into the harbor, and he was carrying a 150-pound pack on his back. So you know what happened to him.
Yeah, he never made it up.
He never made it. So I was damn sure that I timed my jump. Well, anyway, we spent about a week in Sherwood Forest, as a matter of fact, where they had a camp for transients. And we went through London. I can remember seeing the devastation of the London suburbs as we went into London. And then we went to Liverpool, and we got on the ships to cross the channel. And there was a storm going on at that time, and even in the harbor, the small naval ship that I was on was tossing around, and they said, okay, we're not going to put anybody inside. You're all going to be on the deck, because most of you are going to get seasick, and we don't want the consequences of that. And I was one who got seasick, and I remember not even being able to stand up. And but we got to Omaha Beach, where we were to disembark.
Now, can you give any dates on this, approximately?
This was, I think, in late August.
So they landed in June.
They landed in was the 8th of June?
6th of June.
6th of June. And this was in August.
So
they actually had gotten to the German border.
Okay, so they'd taken Paris.
They had gone through Paris at that time. And we were at Omaha Beach, and it was in the dark of night and no moon. But there was a German small biplane buzzing the Omaha Beach area. So they had no lights. And if you've ever seen the shoreline of Omaha Beach, it's almost a vertical cliff.
I've been there, yes.
Yes. And Marilyn and I have been there also. And at which time we learned that my eventual division has more residents in that cemetery than any other unit in the. But anyway, it was totally dark, and we got on the LSDs or LSTs, whatever they were. Essentially, they were cattle boats with, which they packed us firmly in, and then there was a ramp in the front which came down when you unloaded. And they were, the Navy was supposed to drive these LSTs to the end of the dock so that we could get onto the dock and go to the base of the cliff. Well, they hit something and they stopped and they let the front down, and there were so many people in the LST that the first 2 or 3 people in the thing were driven right over the front, and it wasn't the dock. It was a reef. So, second incident of casualties in my military career. And it was raining, and I remember we got up on the dock and they said, okay, grab the pack of the man in front of you, and when you sense he's going forward, you take a measured step and you go forward. And if you don't measure your step correctly, you will hit the space in between the boards on the dock, and you might trip, and we don't want that to happen, so be careful. So we got to the base of the cliff, and remember we're carrying, this was a way of getting clothing and small items to Europe in an efficient manner by putting them into a pack and putting them onto a soldier's back. And unfortunately, my pack weighed more than I did. And so I had to make sure that I leaned forward, and if I stopped, I had to lean, I put my rifle in front of me and lean on the muzzle of the rifle so that I wouldn't fall over. Got to the bottom of the cliff, and they said, this is a rope ladder, and you have to climb this rope ladder. So sling your rifle, and I've forgotten how many, they told us how many steps it was to the top, and climb, which we did. We were well trained. And we got to the top of the cliff, and they said, okay, pick your tent mate, because you're going to have to use your shelter half and his shelter half, and spend the night in this open field. Well, this open field happened to probably had processed several thousands of people before us, and it was about 6 inches deep in very fluid mud. So when we tried to pitch the tent, we had trouble finding the solid ground to pitch our tent in, and we ended up by throwing our packs in and crawling in on top of the packs, and the packs were half buried in the water. So first instance of the luxury of traveling with the Army. Then the next day we got onto a truck. They put our packs in the truck, and we got in the back of the truck and sat on tiers of packs. And the fellow who sat right in front of me, and of course, in the military, when you do something, you do it methodically, and you do it automatically, and you do it consistently. So this guy who sat in front of me was always in front of me every day. And he was from Tennessee, and he was very unhappy with his situation. And he didn't like anybody, and anybody came close to him, had the audacity to speak to him, he had something appropriate to say to them. And apparently, when I couldn't sit still all the time, and my feet moved a little bit, and he got irritated about that, and he complained the first day, about half of the day, about it. And there was a lieutenant with us riding in the cab with the driver, and he admonished him once or twice about getting along with and acclimating to the situation. We stopped for a break and got off the truck, and he had a few words to say to me about my kicking him in the back with my feet, and explained that I wasn't kicking him in the back. I was just trying to keep my circulation going, and that didn't satisfy him. And he was still grumbling when we got back on the truck. And I don't think we'd even started up again, and he jumped up, pulled out his knife, and attacked me. And of course, everybody around me, I mean, I was so startled I didn't even try to defend myself. And he was quickly put down by mates, and the lieutenant came out and got on the, I don't know, somehow they communicated, and that was the last we saw of him. He must have been emotionally deranged, because he certainly wasn't rational. Anyway, we spent about a week going from camp to camp, and we finally got to the Hurtgen Forest, and we were assigned I was assigned to the 2nd Battalion of the 112th Infantry, the 28th Division, and they were in the midst of the Hurtgen Forest, which is a pine forest, a typical European forest, planted, trees equally spaced, very, very clean, no debris whatsoever in the forest.
Was this in Germany?
This is on the border.
On the border.
Yeah, of Germany.
And where is it compared? Approximately, is it near Bastogne or?
Yeah, I've got a map, as a matter of fact.
All right. Well, put that up and just kind of point
well, I
to
don't know
it.
if anything can see it.